What is retro? What was retro? And what will be retro? It's March 2004, and this is Yesterzine. How retro is retro? It's the eternal debate. Some believe in an arbitrary line never moving, be it at the end of the 16-bit genre, be it 2D versus 3D, be it whatever they had when they were a lass. For some it rolls on. 10 or 15 years old is retro. A discontinued machine is retro. The generation before last is retro. And now, in 2023, most of those lines mean that things that were new when retro gaming existed as a term are already fundamentally retro. If PS2 games are retro now, and probably most would say they are, what was retro in 2004? The absolute peak of the PS2 as a state-of-the-art console? The definitive answer to that is available, because this episode we celebrate a birthday. Virtually simultaneous with this release, you'll find issue 250 of Retro Gamer magazine hitting the shops. Given it has only had 2 editors, and one of those for 18 of its 19.5 years, it's easy to forget just how long RG has been around. But the first issue appeared right back in early 2004, from the now long forgotten Live Publishing. Launch editor Martin Carroll would, through little fault of his own, not stick around long as editor, but he did stick around. He's right here in the staff page of issue 248. We are, in many ways, lucky to still have RG. It felt a niche interest magazine, and its launch came as magazines started their steep downturn. It's been through the hands of 3 different publishers. It walks an incredible tightrope of choosing stuff to cover that's not all entirely a repeat of itself, but is retro enough that not too many of their readers throw a shit fit when they put, for instance, Resident Evil 4 on the cover, a game newer than the magazine is. Here's the thing though, Resident Evil 4 is 18 years old. If you track that back from the first issue of Retro Gamer, then you get to 1986. Weirdly, thanks to my age, this makes the launch of Retro Gamer exactly halfway through my history of playing video games. Games that were as old as Resi 4 is today include The Great Escape, Leaderboard, Thanatos, and the original Outrun arcade machine. If you didn't mind early issues of Retro Gamer covering mid-era Spectrum games, it seems difficult to complain about coverage of Resi 4. So in 2004, what was retro? And what did Retro Gamer magazine choose to cover in a world where Xbox vs PlayStation was just getting started? The first thing they chose to do was a mistake. The deliberately scuffed cover of Retro Gamer was supposed to go with the cheeky "old" in the top left, but just ended up making it look like a pile of damaged magazines. Working in retail at the time, I certainly remember doing a double take when the copies arrived. One of these things remains on the cover even today. The other was sensibly never repeated. Coming to this another 20 years of gaming history down the line, Martin's lament of there being so many machines to cover seems adorable, like a teenager who thinks he's seen it all. The big features they choose to illustrate on the contents page are interesting. There's a top 100 we'll certainly be digging into, for instance, but there's also some stuff that might be considered a bit recent if Retro Gamer covered them today. Budget publisher Mastertronic, for instance, had existed until 1991 before becoming something of a victim of the success of its side hustle, being Sega's UK importer. They were eventually bought by the Big S. Street Fighter, while existing since 1987, really broke through in that same year as well. Conversely, Minor Willy seems solid ground. The first of those games was already 20 years old. Thing is, that's as old as Grand Theft Auto San Andreas. Not most people's idea of retro is now. Retro Gamer, then, as now, were being clever. Mastertronic's name was about to be reborn under new owners sold out, themselves a publisher of cheap and cheerful budget offerings. This incarnation lasted roughly a decade, and you may remember boxes for them and their PC Gamer Presents label in the shops for much of that time. You may also remember PS2 budget shithouse Blast Entertainment, which was also their doing. If you don't, consult chum of the channel OK Gamer in the description, as she deals with their interpretation of the Casper license. And I don't even need to explain why a big feature on Lord of the Rings games in the early 00s is just canny publishing, do I? Nah. Let's look at the news. What's new in retro in early 2004? Well, it's a new entry in the Leisure Suit Larry series, something people hadn't learned to fear as much as they do now. Magna Cum Laude was the first without original creator Al Lowe, the last to feature a Sierra logo, and marked the point that a series, while not exactly progressive, had relied on subtlety and innuendo, transitioned into one that was graphic enough to be banned in Australia and heavily cut to be released in America. Retro compilations were well established even by 2004. The Namco Museum series had been around since 1995 and has made an appearance somewhere in every generation since. Midway were getting in on the act, and the first of 3 Arcade Treasures discs featured Defender, Paperboy and Marble Madness among its lineup of 20 arcade games in one pack. This collection is all emulated arcade machines, and it's amazing how we went from people crying out to pay full price for half-accurate arcade conversions to getting 20 perfect ones on a disc in well under a decade. Finally, nowadays we expect HD remasters of everything that'll stand still long enough. I fear they'll be re-releasing new, prettier but slightly worse versions of Last of Us every generation until the heat death of the sun. Not so in 2004. RoboCod's re-release treatment 12 years after its original release was noteworthy, both for that and for being a rare PS1 release on the rapidly declining Super console. Retro Gamer's first editorial of note is a Sinclair retrospective. Could it ever be anything else for a UK magazine like this? And it's a nice history piece. Although whoever wrote the byline promising it would bring us up to date with the 2004 Spectrum scene clearly didn't read the article, because there's really nothing about that, unless you count a brief box out on Gary Lancaster's hard drive packing enhanced +3E. While those pages are still available on World of Spectrum, the thunder has probably been stolen by the Mister and the likes of the ZX Spectrum Next. That said, with the latter machine's second batch 2 years late and counting, it might be easier to build that 3E. The thing about reading a retro magazine this old is, you could obviously use a lot of the copy about the 1980s even now. Unless they need to start talking about something that happened after 2004, then you can easily forget you're reading an old magazine. And then you turn the page and I try to work out how to even explain this. While I have a think, please watch this TV advert.
Hear that? It's coming straight out of the C25, and I gotta let you know, it's my sound.
Klein, leicht, schlau. Das neue Siemens C25. Das hat was. Be inspired.
Back in the early 2000s, mobile phones sounded like that. And you knew they sounded like that because you had things called ringtones that made noises when someone called you. Because people called you. Your mobile phone was occasionally pressed into life in order to act as a phone. If you were lucky, they had an FM radio in, but there's essentially no internet for them, and you certainly weren't using them as a music player. So in order to get those ringtones, which I remind you sound like someone playing a popular tune using their nails on a chalkboard, you had to be sent it via a form of text message. And that would cost you £1.50 a minute for 2.5 minutes. You too can have a tinny version of the Charlie's Angels theme to piss everyone else on the bus off for a mere £3.75. The best part of double that with inflation now. Wallpaper on your phone wasn't a thing either. They didn't have the display, but you could replace the low resolution carrier logo for the same price with what looks like me trying to fake Kylie's signature on the postman's broken touchscreen, while riding a mechanical bull. Drunk. The absolute cutting edge of phones in 2004 did have colour screens, the likes of the Nokia 7200 or Motorola Razr V3. And as such, they could play games, which were also available via suppliers like this. This is a more serious point. People are just starting to really cotton on to game preservation, as even games from the world of modern digital-only distribution are starting to disappear from sale and being rendered essentially lost by DRM. It's not even just obscure stuff. There is now no legal way to ever play Forza Horizon 3's expansions unless you bought them at the time. Games distributed exclusively digital at any scale, though, first happened with the Java games for these phones, and it's only rampant piracy that's kept any of them visible. I went looking for the ones in the adverts and I did find some. You could have paid the best part of £4 for Bumblebees, essentially the world's worst version of Minesweeper, or for Chopper Rescue, like Flappy Bird's idiot cousin. Even so, there were ones like Moon Taxi I just couldn't get to run under emulation, and while you might argue nothing of value is lost, these things are as much a part of gaming history as the Spectrum is. Retro Gamer, we should say, wasn't perfect in issue 1. At 100 pages, it was a small magazine for the time. Today's Retro Gamer has 16 more pages, for instance, despite everything that's happened to magazines since. And it wasn't cheap either. At £5.99, it's also more expensive than the current Retro Gamer is some 19 years later. If you count inflation, that's over a tenner. It wasn't super content dense either. While the per page word count was strong in features like the Lord of the Rings one, that feature was followed by a 1983 advertising gallery. This is 11 pages of an 100-page magazine purely dedicated to reprinting 20-year-old adverts. Not uninteresting then, or now of course, but not exactly high-effort editorial. It does though allow us to see the three ages of man: business, bath and beard. There are a few curiosities. The C64 advert clearly shows a black C64, something which never officially existed as far as I or anyone I asked could tell. Even the one in the advert proper is classic beige. Then again, the ad also claims you can access all the information stored at your office from home by linking the computer to any TV, which I'm not certain is entirely honest. Retro Gamer also makes a conscious choice to not ignore the elephant in the retro room: emulation. Elefation? Always a controversial subject, given that literally no one only ever plays only those games whose carts are on their shelves. Even as YouTube making retro gamers who practically keep IKEA's Billy department in business. Seriously, on your first day at YouTube Towers, you get two things: a voucher for a whole wall of Billys, and a chance to dip your hand into the hat and pull out a machine that you're obligated to champion against all rational sense from that moment forward in every conversation, no matter what the circumstance. But even a wall of Billy isn't going to have everything, and while emulation itself has been repeatedly proven legal in the courts of all nations with any sense, what people use it for has not. Mostly, of course, the recommendations in this article are no longer close to valid, and those emulators that do exist bear very little resemblance to their state in 2004. For instance, the section on King of Arcade Emulators MAME mentions it running 3,000 games. That's now 11,000, although it still can't play Dragon's Lair. Some things have actively regressed. It was common practice then to emulate a Mac on Windows, and these days that's just not a thing. In fact, the two major emulators mentioned, Fusion and Softmac 2000, have not been updated since this magazine was published. Apple being what they are, and the legalities of getting hold of OS whatever without hardware, it's probably not coming back anytime soon either. Retro Gamer do cover themselves slightly with the disclaimer that warns you very strongly to not pirate old games by pointing out no one has ever been prosecuted for doing so. I mentioned Retro Gamer was both smaller and more expensive than it is today in 2004, and the main reason for that is going to be worth us looking at. In the 80s with tapes and the 90s with discs, cover-mounted software was king on the magazines. For the 8-bit likes of your Sinclair, the contents of the tape drove more sales than the contents of the magazine. By 2004, while discs were still a common cover mount, they were starting to be less essential. This is a retro gaming magazine though, and its readers expect a disc. Also, for retro reasons, in a world where most cover mounts were now DVDs, RG mounted a CD on its first 18 issues. But given, as they've just made very clear, you can't go putting commercial games on the thing, what does a retro gaming magazine even do at this point? The answer is nice and easy to find out, because they take the chance to kill another 6 pages of their not especially generous page count on telling us. It's 200 or so freeware games and all the emulators from the preceding feature. The instructions, if they can even be called that, are essentially useless, consisting of just printing the exact same details about the games as you could get from the menu on the disc itself. Most of them are Windows, as you'd expect by 2004, with a smattering of DOS stuff that would require a retro gamer to run, since it had been several years since the last Windows that could have natively run them. Are any of them worth the effort though? Virtually none of them are titles anyone would especially have heard of, and in a way it's nice to see this mass early distribution of independent games before the scene as we know it was really a thing. One that does catch my eye is Sierra RPG Betrayal at Condor. As with virtually all the disc, this claims to be freeware, but I'm not sure that's true. GOG, who distribute many former commercial games for free like Beneath the Steel Sky, still sell Condor for instance, and Sierra and their successors aren't generally big on delisting their old stuff. While you certainly wouldn't call the price money grabbing, the likes of Space Quest are still chargeable, if cheap items, on the likes of GOG and Steam. The Zork games, several of which also appear on this disc, seem likewise. But one thing catches: Attack of the Mutant Camels, a Jeff Minter game. But this version describes itself as a remake which is based off that game. Rather unhelpfully, the menu on the disc does exactly nothing for you, warning the game is in a zip file before attempting to just open said file. Thankfully, on a modern Windows this just works, but wouldn't have been the case back then. What doesn't work on a modern Windows is playing the game, because it's a 16-bit executable. It's a weird hole of time, this. DOS stuff is easy, slap it in DOSBox, job done. Anything with a 32-bit executable, which basically means stuff designed for Windows 2000 and XP, fine. The 16-bit Windows days of 9X design games? Tricky. And so I'm installing Windows 98 on an entire virtual machine. I already know this disc probably isn't going to be worth it. Attack was originally a C64 and Atari 8-bit game, so we'll give them the retro thing. And this PC version is pleasant enough. It has the same utterly wrong stick to the side of the screen controls the C64 version had, but otherwise largely plays the same. It's a silly shoot the camels and avoid the fireball shoot 'em up that's actually one of Minter's more sensible games. There's nothing as such wrong with this PC version, but it does feel a little pointless, and it appears to be running too fast on this PC, which is a little worrying since it's a Pentium 200, a configuration that would have been the best part of a decade old when this issue of RG was published. I'm not entirely convinced this is legal either, freeware or not, although let's just choose to believe RG wouldn't slap illegal software on their disc 2 seconds after telling us not to play it. If you want to play this version, by the way, it came via RetroSpec, and while seemingly dormant, you can download the file from their site, although that'll leave you with the exact same hassle I went through to run it. With respect to the converters, this is a job for a C64. You could, I guess, have had a very nice time going through this disc on a machine spec for the job in 2004, but I don't think Live did anything other than bung files on a disc for this. I'm 100% certain they never had the chance to test 200 games for either legality or compatibility. I think Live insisted on a disc, and the team did their best. For some reason it seems every Retro Gamer cover disc is on archive.org except this one, so I'll try and fix that before this episode, and if I succeed, check the description. Gamer presented their most ambitious feature as the top 100 of all time. But what they mean is they chose 10 machines and did top 10s. The timing is interesting here. This is not going to be the same as a list from when the machine was current, because that's judging games based on their current impact. But you'd also expect it to be different from a more modern list, with 25 to 30 years of new indie games, improvements in genres and different tastes to take into account. One of the machines here is the SNES, which in some markets was still in production. That choice of machines might be a product of the time and country too. The Master System and NES are overlooked, but the BBC Micro gets an entry, perhaps reflecting that the kids who had them in schools were absolutely the target readership of RG at this point. Other than the very near contemporary SNES and Mega Drive, the only console to get a mention is the Atari 2600. So how do we evaluate these lists? Well, here's one idea. In 2016, Retro Gamer themselves did a SNES special magazine. It includes a top 25. So how many of their 2003 top 10 SNES greatest were still considered so 13 years later? And do I agree with them? We start easy. Super Mario World, later to be voted the greatest game ever by Retro Gamer readers. It starts the issue 1 list, and it's number 1 here too. Of course it is. Some Sonic fans may disagree, but if the 2D platformer peaks anywhere, it's with this game. Super Mario Kart comes next in 2003, and it's 4th in 2016. I'll die on the hill that for single players, this is still the peak of the series. The modern ones are pretty and superb party games, but absurd rubber banding and the constant AI spamming of blue shells makes for a frustrating solo experience for me. This and multiplayer of MK8 are the only ones I have any desire to be playing. Street Fighter 2 Turbo. I guess we could debate whether the original or even Super should be here, but it's 3rd in both lists and is probably the poster child for doing an update without wrecking the original. Star Wing, better known as Star Fox. Brave, groundbreaking, stunning on release. Possibly the most famous use of an add-on chip in a game cartridge of all time. A triumph for Argonaut as famous today as it ever was. And our first failure. By 2016 it was only number 13. I see it though. Star Wing is a victim of its own success to a degree. While Mario World's position as the peak of its genre is helped by big budget 2D platformers becoming increasingly rare past this point, 3D space shooter is a genre that's been visited more times than your mum's local clinic. And Star Fox has flaws. It's a bit clunky, its frame rate barely deserves the use of the word rate, and obviously it's not the looker it once was. Do not let any of that put you off playing it though, it's super cheap to buy even. A similar win for Zelda Link to the Past. The next mainline Zelda game is later best game runner-up to Mario World Ocarina of Time, and while titles like Link Between Worlds have revisited 2D Zelda, it's only maybe Link's Awakening that has any call to fight it in the 2D Zelda stakes. 5th here, up to 2nd by 2016. Pilot Wings, a launch title. The first to use an expansion chip in the cart, and, with few sequels or even imitators, quite a unique experience 30 years later. Retro Gamer in 2016 described it as a tech demo and a vision of the future, in a way meant to sound like a compliment. It is. This was where the SNES's 3D environment party trick known as Mode 7 was first shown, even before F-Zero, and the height component makes it even more effective here. 6th here, 7th later. Super Probotector, or Contra 3 for Americans. An easy top 10 in both eras for this. The SNES one I don't know so well, but I'm a big fan of it on Mega Drive. In that case, you're advised to go for the Japanese one as it has a life bar and infinite continues. No such option here, and as such the SNES one is impossibly rock hard. We'll forgive it that. I'm only going to see 5% of it, but like all Contra games, it's going to be 5% of an absolute riot. It's also noticeably prettier than its Mega Drive cousin. Donkey Kong Country was the first one that really raised my eyebrows when I read the 2004 list. I've said before I love the game, but even on release it traded on its looks. Urban legends say it was initially mistaken for an N64 surprise reveal on first showing, and it used some of the silicon graphics tech that would eventually underpin that machine. It's number 8 here, and had fallen to 15 by 2016. That isn't surprising. An evaluation so close to the actual life of the machine is still marvelling at the technical aspects and maybe overlooking some of the flaws like pixel perfect jumps, restart points that sometimes make those impossible, and slightly sluggish controls. Super Metroid on the other hand is probably the point where people started calling Metroidvanias that. The SNES had the power to do Metroid how it should have been done in the first place, and there are few games that aren't gigantically complex RPGs with this kind of depth. Moving from 9th to 5th over the years proves that. But then the other title missing from the more modern list. The author admits this is a personal inclusion, but slightly generic launch sport title Super Tennis is probably not in everyone's top 10. It's not even my favourite tennis game on the system. But hey, if you've just had to come up with blurb about 100 games for a new magazine, I'm going to allow you a personal choice. That said, 12 years later it did still make the top 25, although even in 2016 they admit it might be nostalgia talking, in as much as any entry on a list of games for a 20-year out-of-date system could be not nostalgic. So the smarter of you will note there are 3 games in the new list that are not in the old one. What's replaced Donkey Kong Country, Star Fox and Super Tennis in the affections of the modern gamer looking back at the generation? Well, I mentioned Metroidvanias getting their name around Super Metroid, but the Vania side of the equation was well served on SNES too. The modern 10th place game is Super Castlevania 4. A lot of what I said about Contra is going to apply again, hardly surprising as both are Konami games. Sure, Castlevania doesn't look like it's as insane as Contra. It reels you in with its slow atmospheric intro, with its beautiful scenery and with its frankly cheerful music. It's got a life bar too, but make no mistake, this is at least as rock hard as its showy stablemate. Everything will chip at your life force. Your whip is nowhere near as rangy and effective as Contra's all the weapons. And restart points in Castlevania are rarer than an NHS dentist, and you'll have to travel about as far to find one. Symphony of the Night gets the attention as a Castlevania game, but these earlier games are no less worth your time. I mentioned only gigantically complex RPGs had the kind of depth of Super Metroid, so here's one. Secret of Mana. I'm genuinely surprised this didn't make the 2004 list, to be honest. Mana was the subject of our second ever cover feature as the poster child for how, back in the day, we were lucky if Japanese games made it to Europe at all. Even if they did, like Mana, they took well over a year to do it. As such, it would probably be remembered fondly even if it wasn't a banger. But Mana absolutely is. And that's before considering the drop-in co-op and the surprisingly modern real-time battle system that's probably a better ancestor of Final Fantasy VII Remake than Final Fantasy VII is. The highest placed new entry is Super Mario World sequel Yoshi's Island, using the Super FX chip to jazz up the concept. Funnily, 2016 Retro Gamer said they expected it to be higher, when they didn't even put it in the top 10 when they had a chance. Truthfully, it's hard to argue strongly with either of these lists. They're 70% identical, and all 6 of the disputed games are well worth your time. The lower end of the new list includes games like F-Zero, SimCity and Chrono Trigger, that should always be part of the discussion. So let's do it again, this time with the Mega Drive. Oh, sorry, that's the Sega Genesis known as the Sega Mega Drive outside North America. Because Wikipedia admins are terminally online dickheads, abusing the only authority they will ever have in their life. Retro Gamer did a Sega book in 2016 as well, and this list differs more sharply. I'm going to immediately expand it to 12 in the new version, because that splits the 3 major Sonics into separate entries, all of which make the top 10. The old list picks Sonic 2 to represent the series. Let's not litigate the Sonic series now. I think they've picked the right one. Games Master would disagree. Speaking of picking the right single game, Road Rash 2. We should probably look at this series closer one of these days. There were somehow 7 main series entries for Road, and what'll really bake your noodle is Road Rash 3 is not the third Road Rash game. Road Rash 2 is the best one. It iterated just enough on the first one without ruining the flow or aesthetic like the later attempts at 3D Rashes did. It's got a good range of bikes and courses and an excellent Super Nitro bike cheat. If you play one, it's the one to play, and deservedly it's well inside the top 10 in 2016 in the absence from both lists of either other Mega Drive entry in the series. Shining Force, incorrectly sometimes credited to the Sonic team, is actually from the people who would later create Waluigi and Mario Golf. A fantasy RPG with a combat system that more closely resembles XCOM than most of its peers. A little bit of unfriendliness led me to bounce off the sequel when it appeared on this show, but it still had a style that shone through and a legion of dedicated fans. It only makes 22 on the modern list, however. No such problem for what Sega Power considered a 73% rated platformer, impressively making 2 mistakes in 3 words. Gunstar Heroes is a Contra-like masterpiece from Treasure, and the first game they finished. There are very few games that go 0 to 11 this quickly, and Gunstar stays there. Sega Power were convicted in the 73% trials on this channel for their part in this, and if you were put off by their laughable coverage, don't let this stop you. Although even I would hesitate to suggest the 3-figure sums a good condition physical release goes for can be justified. No argument or justification needed for the 2016 #1 Streets of Rage 2 either. If there's a better side-scrolling beat-em-up in existence, I've never played it. And while it's slightly in the middle of the 2003 list, by 2016 it was topping the reader's survey that formed the basis of the new article. Some bloke called The Laird said he'd give it 20 points, demonstrating the same grasp of relative numbers that would later cause someone called The Laird to claim they wrote a commercial Spectrum game while barely old enough to walk. There are times being old pays off, because RG's recommended shooter Thunder Force 4 now goes for silly money. I, though, acquired a copy somewhere in the 90s, presumably for 2p in a marathon bar. Despite quite a lot of competition on the system, this retained its place, sitting at 10 on the 2016 list. I'm not disagreeing as I play this from my cartridge for the first time in a while. It's absurdly pretty for an early-ish Mega Drive game, possibly even too pretty at times, making some things difficult to pick out amongst the detail. While I continue to be legendarily bad at shooters, I get 10 minutes into this thing and I'm very much entertained. I'd probably also have considered including something from Toa Plan like Zero Wing, but really that's the only horizontally scrolling competition on the system to my mind. A couple of steps up the new list is another of the absolute gimmies, Revenge of Shinobi. If anything, this one is the least favourite of the series for me, lacking some of the charm of the Master System era original, and lacking some of the refinement of the third entry in the series. But public opinion has always centred on this one, and with Yuzo Koshiro at his best and endless invention, it's not one you'll ever be disappointed to pick up. It's here though we collide with the wild card. Pinball game Dragon's Fury only appears in the early list, and I think we need to take a proper look because I don't think I've played it. It's actually a port of a PC Engine game called Devil's Crash, brought to the Mega Drive by Thunder Force developers Technosoft, which is immediately promising. There is one very easy way to describe Dragon's Fury, and that's it's Kirby's Pinball Land, The Angry Teenage Years. It's got the same multi-screen, multi-table setup as both that and HAL's earlier Revenge of the Gator, although of course neither invented it. In general, it was used to disguise the lack of smooth scrolling, and while both those Game Boy games are indeed flick screen affairs, Dragon's Fury does scroll smoothly between the various scenarios. The angry goth teenager aesthetic used to be even more so. Unless Developers Compile's original version has a lot more of that kind of thing, which we apparently couldn't be trusted to see without immediately turning into Satanists or something. Either way, it doesn't really affect it as a game. I'm a fussy bugger for pinball games, and on Mega Drive the only other one I've found that I really want to play is Codemaster's Psycho Pinball. This could well join it. If you know Kirby, much of this will be familiar. Work your way up the table by finding the tricks or getting a bit lucky with a bounce, and then you can enter one of the many bonus stages for massive points. All of these are inventive, all of these are clever. I wondered why Dragon's Fury had a ball speed option in its menu, defaulting to fast. And this is an answer you get 0.2 seconds into the game as the ball pings around like it's on fire. And it gives away this is not a pinball game that will be a slave to entirely realistic physics. But it is a slave to physics that makes sense. The only downside to the thing is it's a single table game. But I picked up my copy for £12 box, so I'm not going to begrudge it that. We're going to be back here a lot. Might be the perfect thing to stick on for when people are late to meetings. Both remaining 2004 games at least make the 2016 top 25. In 2004, Retro Gamer chose Jungle Strike over its considerably more famous predecessor. I'm not even going to litigate that, and in 2016 neither did Retro Gamer themselves, with Desert making 20 and Jungle 25. Take your pick really. Perhaps helped by it not being a tremendously popular setup outside these titles, the early Strike games are still the best of this kind of thing you'll find. And lastly, Quackshot. An interesting call given the more talked about Mickey Mouse games do not make the 2004 list. Personally, I'd tend to choose Castle of Illusion, which did considerably better in 2016. But I would be sat there with the nagging feeling I should be playing the equally excellent Master System version instead. Either way, it's interesting how much taste changed in 12 years when looking at a static library for all the systems. But then, you ask me for a top 10 Master System games today, and I'd probably give you a different answer than I'd have given you on Thursday. So perhaps I shouldn't read too much into it. In any case, I think you can probably safely suggest the 15 or so games that made their respective lists in both 2004 and 2016 should be played immediately. On the back page, it can only be Retro Gamer itself, but as implied, it's not precisely the same RG we're looking at. After 18 issues, the magazine was going well, but sadly the publisher was not. Live took a bath halfway through the production of issue 19, to the extent that articles had been commissioned and indeed written for the magazine. It should have ended there, an interesting experiment that would still have been a lovely episode for this series. It didn't though. Imagine Publishing stepped in, already publishers of Games TM, which had a comprehensive retro section. They transferred the editor of that, one Darren Jones, to lead a new Retro Gamer. It dropped that Coverdisc, probably for the best, but otherwise the philosophy didn't change a whole lot. And still hasn't. RG has now outlived virtually every magazine we'll ever cover on this show. There are of course some criticisms. For instance, there are grumbles about RG being a home for old white guys, and frankly the lineup at the start of issue 249 does nothing to bat those away. They have also sometimes, in their enthusiasm for new retro stuff, glossed over some issues with products like AtGame's pre-mini Mega Drive shitboxes, the nothing to do with Commodore 64, and the odd lazy compilation. If that's all people can say about you on the internet after 250 issues though, you're doing pretty bloody well. Darren was keen to point out he's merely holding a torch passed to him by Martin Carroll and the Live Publishing team. I'd say he's undersold it. Martin did minor miracles with what must have been heavy restrictions at Live, and launching what is frankly a batshit idea onto the market. One look at issue 249 though, and the level is massively beyond those early days. Whether you agree with their definition of the term or not, Retro Gamer is an institution. Everyone who is anyone has now been within its pages at some point. And 18 years later, Darren's still there and still as enthusiastic as ever, as he proved when this channel talked to him.
I get to write about video games for a living. I get to document video game history.
So yeah, support your local paper magazine, now published by Future like bloody everything else. It's still in shops, still costing less than it did in 2004, and is now so long-lived that Retro Gamer is, in itself, retro. Goodbye.